All right, I believe we are live. Let me check here. There's a bit of a delay. Can anyone else tell me if we're live?
I think we are, yeah.
Okay, my husband says not yet.
Oh, no?
There we go. Okay. All right, we are live. Hi, everyone. My name is Cynthia Payne, and this is the Social Distance Book Fest, where you can stay home while supporting authors and indie bookstores and hopefully add a few more books to your TBR. My name is Cynthia Payne. I am the author of The Last Dragon Princess, which is a standalone YA fantasy about dragon shifters fighting for their freedom from a race of immortal gods. This channel is mine. I do book reviews. I do tutorials on storytelling and on self-publishing. But today I am very excited to be hosting an amazing group of authors for our panel, New Frontiers in Publishing and Storytelling. And we have one more to add here. All right. In a moment, I'm going to ask the panelists to introduce themselves. But if you're wondering what the Social Distance Book event is, this is a brief overview. This is an all-day event created by a dedicated group of bookworms from all corners of the internet. It includes 18 panels, more than 80 authors, virtual fandom meetups, virtual signing opportunities, and some amazing giveaways. You can check out the website and social media links listed below for all the details, and check out our page where you can order books from featured authors and support indie bookstores. 10% of all these proceeds will be donated to the Center for Disease Philanthropy's COVID-19 funds. We hope you take advantage of everything the Book Fest has to offer, and in case you miss any interesting panels, check out the playlist for all the panels and meetups, which will continue to be available for viewing. With that said, let's hear from our panels. Ladies, please introduce yourselves and your preferred pronouns and tell us about your book. We'll start. We'll do
that way.
We'll go talk.
Okay. I am J.E. Purazzi. I am a speculative fiction author, the writer of the Malfunction trilogy and the Raven Tree Society, and the managing editor of the Phoenix Fiction Writers, for pronouns to be she and her. And this is my book, Malfunction. It is a sci-fi set in a future where animalistic aliens have driven humanity underground, and our three main characters are trying to manage a overbearing government and government.
Hi, I'm Emma Hamm. Most people know me from the Otherworld series, but most recent series is Celestials, there's Beneath Stands, there's the Blood series, and a lot of books. But the most recent one is sort of a cursed gods type feel with gargoyles and French chateaus and kind of all of those fun is he cursed, is he not vibes. And she, her is perfect for me.
Nice. So is it Shannyn or Amara?
Amara, yes, you're up.
Okay, awesome. I am Amara Luciano. I am the YA author of Heirs of Fate, which might as well hold it up right over here. It's a compilation of novellas featuring three rebellious women who are on their way to conquering their fates in unorthodox ways set against, nefarious gods and pirates and an evil queen to boot. And there's more to come. There's more to come this summer. And she, her works for me. Unorthodox ways set against gods and pirates and an evil queen to boot. There's more to come.
All right. I am getting a lot of feedback. Does anybody have yeah, are you guys getting the double down feed? All right. Okay. Can you
is that better?
Okay, sorry. So I'm
the newbie here.
That's all right. It's happened on a couple panels. So I'm JD Evans. You can just call me Jen. I write epic fantasy romance, and by epic I mean just really big fat books. And so here's the first one, Reign and Ruin. They're set in Second World Ottoman Empire with magic, and I like to write women that are strong in different ways than being just kick-ass, and I like to write men that are nice, like beta men. So that's kind of what you'll find in my books.
And I am Shannyn Schroeder. I write contemporary romance. I have a bunch of different series. I have the O'Learys, For Your Love, Daring Divorcees, and I'm just now re-releasing my hot and nerdy novellas. She and her are my pronouns.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, thank you all very much. All right, so the people are here because they want to get to the learning. So let's get right into the questions. We have a list of questions that everyone's been provided with ahead of time. And towards the end, we'll go into some questions that were solicited by the team here from the audience. So first question, very important question. Your main protagonist in your latest book, dog person or cat person?
Oh.
I love that. I would probably say cat people, which the irony is that I am not a cat person at all. I'm more of like a cat dog. I straddle the line. And somehow I've written all cats.
I'd say for me, probably dog person. I feel like anybody who's attracted to a gargoyle is probably going to be a dog person.
Mine would probably be a cat person. She's very independent and she doesn't have time for people's nonsense. So she'd be a cat person.
My last release is my horror, The Raven Tree Society, and anyone who has read those has known that the main character, Kyle Hansen, is not responsible enough for any pets.
I'm a dog person. Like, all of my people are dog people. If a pet appears at all in a book, it's almost always a dog, and almost always a big dog because I'm a big dog person. So, yeah, I would go with dog for sure.
Mine, she was definitely a cat person, and the main antagonist was a dog person. So there was more conflict in it than there, but that was.
That wasn't the start of the World War III in your book.
All right. So first real question now. Indie, traditional, or hybrid? Why did you choose the path you chose, and what do you think is the single biggest strength and weakness of that path? So we'll start same order, J.E. Yep.
Okay. Sounds good. I chose indie. I'm keeping the options open for hybrid in the future. I see a lot of possibilities in that, mostly because I'm someone who has a hard time making choices, so I want the best of all worlds. But for me, the biggest reason that I chose indie was because the more I learned about the publishing industry, the more I learned that a lot of the choices that are made in the publishing industry are not this like end all be all, this is a good book, this is a bad book because these people know. Yes, they have experience, and yes, they have companies and money behind their back, but a lot of it still depends on what they think is marketable and what's according to their taste. So for me, I would prefer to just skip over that and base my success on my direct contact with my readers. I would rather be just me and my readers and skip the publishers and skip the bookstores, as much as I appreciate both of those. So for now, that's my choice. We'll see where it goes in the future.
I am indie and always will be indie. When I first started, it was more of a time thing. I didn't really want to wait and to have to send, a query letter to 150 agents and hope somebody would give me a chance when I could just do it myself and publish immediately. Now I think it's more because I'm a micromanager. I'm not interested in having somebody tell me the ending of your book is not sellable because I know it is, because I've done very well and I'm a USA Today bestseller. So try and tell me that it's not true, that my ideas work. But I think that there's merits in both for sure. I think the biggest strength in indie publishing in general is the community. the connection I have with my readers and the ability that I have to give out free copies or whatever I want to do is invaluable. As far as the weakness, though, if you're just starting out in this, it is a lot. And if you don't have somebody to kind of help, you're going to make a lot of mistakes, just like I did. Trust me, I've made so many mistakes. So it's definitely, there's a lot of research that goes into it.
Yeah.
I love that. I'm someone who definitely believes in trying before you're ready, right? And I think when you pursue traditionally published, the traditional publishing route, you end up having to get things right really, really quickly, or it seems like, you tank or you fall apart or you fall down, right? So for me, it was about getting started and dipping my toes. And then now it's sort of evolved into, I'm a visionary, right? I'm the CEO of my own company. So I like to have the control over where, like the trajectory of where I'm going, right? And I don't like to have limitations placed upon me. Granted, I know that there are ways around that in traditional publishing. However, I just don't want to, I don't want that contention. Like, I'd just rather be me, and I'd rather be fully me, and I'd rather express myself and not have anyone's ties on me, or my future, or the way I want to do things. And then in terms of weaknesses, I would say if you're not very decisive, it can be really hard, right? Because there's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of information. There's a lot of different ways to do things. And I think if you're someone who has a hard time trusting their gut and trusting their instinct, it can get really difficult to figure out which way you should go, what path you should take. And ultimately, when you fall into indie in and of itself, there's a lot of different ways to market. There's a lot of different ways to, go about getting the cover. There's a lot of different ways to reach out to readers, to develop your street team, to do all the things, right? Forget about the writing process in and of itself. Like that, like everybody has a different take on that. So for me, yeah, I think if you're someone who has a hard time trusting their gut and trusting their instinct, it'll be a little bit harder. And then, making the kinds of decisions you need to make going forward. So I don't know, but I love it. I love it personally for the sake of my vision and for where I'm going.
So I'm indie, and I might try hybrid at some point, but some of the decisions that went into it were very similar to what Emma said, which is at some point, I've been writing since I was a kid, which I think is true of most writers. And I just was like, I am tired of dinking around. I want to put a book out there, and I felt like I was ready. And even if you are ready by someone else's standards and trad, it can be, if you get an agent soon, which is, soon when you're waiting for an agent to pick you up is a long time. It's 18 months, 2 years before you ever see your book in print. That's a long time. And then on top of that, I wanted control because I had a vision for a series, and you are completely beholden to the sales of your first book. If nobody buys your first book, they don't want the rest of your books, and they probably own the rights to your world. So you can't write in that world either. Often that may be changing now, but when I was looking at it, that was kind of it. And so I didn't want to turn over the reins of this big thing that I had in my head to somebody else. So as for strengths for indie, I think it's twofold. I think it's control and flexibility. So one of the reasons that Bethany and the booktubers and all the people that put together this book fest did it was because they saw all of these 2020 debut authors about to lose all of their publicity for their books, all of the things that had been planned for 18 months, a year, 2 years, going down the tubes. And so they wanted to support those authors. Indies are in a much better position to quickly adapt to something like this. And then the control, just like, it may have been Jill or Amara, I'm not sure who said it, I apologize, but I knew what I wanted on my covers. I knew, I knew how I wanted to market the books. I get the money for it. I don't have to split it between me and several other people, and then also, like, you write a series and it kind of peters out. You have enough control to revamp it and resell it and start it over and get excitement for it again. And in trad, once people are done with your book, they're done with your book. It just disappears. So that's why I chose indie.
All or nothing. Yeah.
Well, I guess I'm the lone hybrid in this group.
Well, aspiring hybrids in the group, maybe.
For me, I started writing. I mean, yeah, I wrote when I was younger, but then I was a teacher, and then I was a mom, and so not seriously until 2009, 2010, somewhere around there. I had my first couple of books under my belt, the really bad ones that nobody ever sees. And so that was like right when Kindle and self-publishing was hitting, and I was watching people. But for me, it was like, that seems like a lot of work. And I was like, I am not going down that rabbit hole. I don't know how to format a book. I don't, no, just not for me. So I went the traditional route because I didn't know enough. I mean, I spent a lot of time learning the business, kind of learning about contracts and things like that. And so I wanted that experience of working with an editor, someone who really knows how to do it right. Obviously, they're in this business, they're selling books, they know what they're doing. So I wanted that experience, but like in the back of my head, there was always like, so I'm writing the series, and my first series was digital first. So, publishers were more likely to take a chance. They were all kind of experimenting back then with digital first. And I was okay with that. Like my agent was less okay with it. She's like, but we can keep going. We can go. It was a first round submission. And she's like, we can keep going. I'm like, you know what? I'm okay with digital first. I'm a nobody. Need some time to figure things out. So in my head, it was always like, I can use this series. I can figure things out. Somewhere down the line, I will get the rights back, and then I will be ready and in a position to self-publish them, which is exactly what I've done. So, I took that knowledge of, all of the ins and outs of working with a publisher. So it was good for me to have that experience. So for me, the pros of working with a publisher, they have reach. Not just like the bookstore, like people pay attention, and they have outreach. So it's easier, I think, in some respects to kind of get discovered by readers. The downside, of course, is the total lack of control. You don't like your cover? Too bad. You don't like the blurb? Too bad. You want to, do some special marketing and you want to put something on sale? Too bad. So all of that can be very frustrating because you like it's all up to somebody else. And so being hybrid, I kind of like, I get the best of both worlds. I've got my books with publishers. Every now and then they do a big push. And when they do a big push, I'm like, oh, look, these books are on sale. But you know what? This is a spinoff. And these are the ones that are self-published. So, I like that. So right now at this point, I'm more indie than traditional. But I would always keep, maybe about 50-50. I'd have to count books. I would definitely keep that door open. But I think especially in the genre in which I write, indies own it. And publishers can't compete. And I think they realize that. And so they're acquiring less and less because they know they can't compete with the indies. So, yeah, it's a fun world.
I'm glad we've got a hybrid on here, so you can give us that perspective.
Yeah.
Jesse Owen very much admires your long-term view of your career and how you're looking out for the future there, long-term goals. She admires that. For me, just from a business point, I think I'm indie. And just from a business point, it seems like there's so much more opportunity to explore the niche markets that traditional publishers cannot publish to. I mean, gargoyle science fiction, you can't get much more niche than that. And a traditional publisher would be looking at that and looking at the $6,000 minimal, publishing cost to put a book out or whatever it is now, and would say it's not feasible. We're not going to sell enough books to cover the initial cost. But indie, you can get that out a lot cheaper, and you can explore that, and you can build a niche market in many ways. I'd say the biggest downfall or the biggest weakness is all the moving parts. There's a lot to learn. It's a lot to learn very fast. You got to keep up, and it's all connected to everything else. And it's all on you. You're doing the job of about 20 different people, and there's no school for it. You didn't.
Yeah.
So,
But I think the upside to that as well is that all the work that you're putting into it will return back to you. Whereas if you're exclusively traditionally published, one of the big factors for me is G.R. Martin, who wrote the Game of Thrones books, the Song of Ice and Fire. He had one book where he nearly lost his career, and this is after he was well established. So I was like, okay, if he could lose his career and I'll have all that work down the drain, and have none of the rights left over, then what makes me think that won't happen to me? So
yeah. Oh, sorry.
No, you go ahead, Amara. You go. Yep.
Sorry. So I think too, also looking at what's happening in quarantine right now. We're seeing a lot of, small business owners, unfortunately, cave during this time of not knowing how to pivot to being online and to showing up on, let's say, social media, promoting and things like that. And I have, friends on the other side of the pond, right, in the trad pub side of things. And, the communication in terms of marketing and publicity, like a lot of you guys were saying, it's kind of crumbling right now because they don't have, one thing with indies is we're really, really concerned with readers. Like reader relationship is tip top priority. And so we focus very early on creating a brand for ourselves and standing apart and all of that. So we have a very tight relationship with our readers. And so something like this, we have easy access to our customers, right? We have easy access. We're not debilitated by something like quarantine, where we could just essentially pivot towards, whatever that looks like. Like JD brought up new covers, starting up a tour, creating little hubs online, whereas, traditional publishing, they're not able to or not equipped with the same sort of like turnaround, the same pulse either, like on, what readers are doing right now, how they're interacting, how are they interacting with authors right now. We kind of have like the up-to-date stuff, which is why, it's kind of tricky. And I feel for a lot of the trad pub authors right now. I think we have a different, I think we have a different set of reins when it comes to what's happening.
Yeah, no, there's a lot to consider when you're looking at it. All right, some great answers here. I love you guys. So question 2, how do you see the option of self-publishing affecting the future of the publishing landscape?
Do you want to just go in rows again?
Yeah, Jill, you're up.
Okay. So for me, this quarantine is shaking a lot of things up, and I think we all need to recognize that this isn't something out of the ordinary. These sorts of things happen all over the world all the time, and this is just a more global example of the way that businesses can be disrupted. I think, I would like to say that indies will rise a little bit more, but I think, it's difficult to say with any confidence what will or won't happen as far as, indies are going to get more attention in this, or, trad pub is going to be on its knees. I think that, we have a lot to see yet in which direction that goes. But one thing I would really like to see in the future that I think we've been working towards, and hopefully quarantine will allow that to happen more, this entire outbreak, is that I'd like to see traditionally published and self-published work more hand in hand. So one thing that indies are really into is diversifying and making sure, I have not just my books, but I have audiobooks and I have ebooks and I have hardcover and I have large print and, so on and so forth. And, all of us are at different places with that, but all those things are IP, they're, intellectual property. And some of those things are handled better by traditional publishers, just naturally. Audiobooks are very, very expensive for indies right now. And I would love to be able to sell off, audio rights to my books. Traditionally published authors have much closer relationships with Hollywood and with movie makers, and that kind of intellectual property is something that most indies still don't have access to. So to be able to bring traditional publishers to the point where they're not demanding all of the rights and not saying, you know, we need worldwide rights of everything in your IP, but are able to say, okay, let me handle this and you handle that. You have a better connection to the readers and we have a better connection over here. I'd love to see that happening more and more and more. And I think there is a future in that, but I think it's a good ways off.
Yeah. So for me, as far as some of the data, BookBub has recently published some really awesome data about quarantine and that kind of stuff. And I think that traditionally publishing books in the future are going to come across some really hard times. Readers are voracious. They want it faster and they want it now. Waiting 2 years for a book, they have forgotten you exist as an author. So that is something that traditionally published authors are really going to have to start looking at. And just in general, publishers, we're seeing a lot of mid-range and lower-end publishers just fizzle out. They can't make the sales. You cannot focus on paperbacks. People want very quick, very now, immediately. I do agree that the different types of books, ebooks, audiobooks, all of that, hugely important. And trad definitely focuses more on those, especially the paperbacks and hardcovers. They make way better copies than we possibly can, especially with the foiled covers. That's not something we really have access to as indies. But audiobooks are really coming hot. Yeah, like really quick. ACX is a wonderful way to get involved with voice actors. You can split the royalty share. I've done that many times. It depends on who you ask whether or not it's worth it. But I know Tantor Media as well has been pushing hard to get as many rights to books as possible. And their deals are really great as far as contracts. So I think audiobooks are going to see a massive bump in indies very, very soon. I know I personally have quite a few. So I think publishers are going to have to go faster. And that's not something that they're used to right now. So I'm curious to see if they're up to the game. I think that they will have to, is just the long and short of it.
Here's what I would love to see. I would love to see more people come to the understanding that there are many ways to publish a book, right? Like, it's so versatile, and I think it even goes beyond the labels of trad and indie, right? There are so many ways to attain a traditionally published deal. There's so many ways to get your book on, in the indie space, right? Producing it yourself. I mean, I saw somebody in the comments say that, like, what will happen when indies lose access to Amazon for distribution for ebooks? And I'm sure there's someone really smart on this panel who potentially could answer that, or someone
drop to digital.
Yeah.
Very easy to get it. It's one click button and you can put it on everything.
So, but for me, like, it's not even a question of what will happen when so-and-so does this. Part of the reason we came into this game the way that we did, potentially, like, I think all of us here indie in some way, is because we want that control, right? And we're solution oriented. So we find other ways to bring the stories out there to the humans. It really doesn't matter what the platform is. It's about the best fit decision for you, right? So I hope that in all of this coming out, that people start to realize there is no one size fits all. There is multiple ways to come on to the scene, whether it's trad or indie. And that people get creative, right? Because now, especially, like, we're all having to pivot during this wild, crazy time of trying to figure out how to get, how to get our readers interested, how to get our books out there, right? So I hope that people become more creative, a little bit more independent in their thinking, in their producing, and don't worry so much, I guess, about the rules,
So when you're talking about a large entity, you are talking about something that moves very slowly. And one of the problems that trad has is that they are managing multiple authors, and it's kind of an antiquated system. So you're not going to see, I think, moving forward, as many of these big names that everybody recognizes, the Stephen Kings, the Sarah J. Maas, the big gargantuan authors that even if you haven't read them, you have heard their name. I just think that's going to go away, because even now there's some obscene millions of books that are published on Amazon, both trad and indie, and people find what they like and they devour it. And trad, the only way that trad can keep up with what an individual indie author can do is to get a stable of writers writing in a single series. They did that with Star Wars. They did that with Star Trek. Harlequin is doing that in some of their contemporary romance series. And it makes it a little quicker, but not quick enough. Some indies, I cannot do this. Some indies can put out a book a month. And, some people are going to argue, yeah, I know, I've seen your 10,000 word days. You just be quiet over there. Some people would argue quality, but I would argue they haven't read very many indie books. Just because somebody picked your book up in trad because it was at the right moment and it was their taste, doesn't mean your book is of higher quality than something an indie put out, because if they denied you, it might just be because it was the 5th vampire gargoyle menage they had seen that month and they didn't want anymore. But there's still a giant audience for that, so that's what trad can't keep up with. And I think they're going to break apart. I would argue they are going to have to break apart into smaller entities that do it faster, because there's just no other way that they could do it. That's it. That's all I got.
Well, I totally agree with that. As someone who's been down that traditional road, like I said, I came up with my first books, right when indie publishing was like big. The Kindle was everywhere, and people were like, "Oh, look, this is easy. I can do this myself." At least that lies that people say about it being easy. But
yes.
And then all of the big five were like, "Oh, wait a minute, we've been ignoring ebooks this whole time. Maybe we should pay attention." So then they all came out with like their digital first arms, and I think at this point, 10 years later, Kensington still has theirs.
Harlequin has Carina.
Yeah, and Carina. So most of the others all folded because they didn't know what they were doing. I mean, bottom line, they have no clue when it comes to digital publishing. I mean, they can produce the ebook, obviously, but they don't treat it any differently than they do print books. And then when you start seeing that they're like, oh, well, we're just going to, set the price of the ebook at $7.99 or $10.99, and then the print book's only going to be $6.99. That's where their money is. So I don't think that they will ever really be able to compete with indies. And I think there are certain genres where at this point I think they've conceded. 10 years ago, the market for romance is always, up and down. And 10 years ago it was, oh, contemporary romance doesn't sell, nobody's buying contemporary. And I'm like, oh shit, that's all I write.
Somebody beat
all the
her.
Oh, you know what? I was going to ask first because I'm usually really bad, but
I filmed during that time. It's the only time I can curse. So,
that's the mild one. So that's pretty good that I haven't dropped any F-bombs yet. Right. So, for me, it was like, okay, well, what am I going to do? And so I just kept plugging along. And then contemporary romance came back big and it was everywhere. And now the market's flooded. And the thing is that it's not just flooded traditionally, it's flooded with indies. So there's so many. And now the pubs are like, unless you've got something that we look at and we can say without a doubt, this is going to be huge, we're going to make gobs of money off of you, they're not going to buy you. And that doesn't mean that you're not good. That doesn't mean that you won't sell. That just means that they're not ready to put money behind you because it's not going to come back, 100-fold to them. So I think that in a lot of genres, they've conceded that. They're like, we can't compete. We can't compete with those people who have already gone indie, who are putting out, even if it's 5 books a year. Most publishers won't go that route, I mean, with a select few, Nora Roberts, she can put out 8 or 10 books a year, and it doesn't matter because everybody's going to buy her books and they're going to buy them in print and they're going to buy them in hardcover. And that's fine. But most people, especially if you're a debut, they're not going to, you're like, oh, I can write 8 books a year. And they're like, that's great. We'll take 2.
Yeah. Yeah. maybe 1.5. Let me see the first half of that second book. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I just don't think they'll ever.
Yeah, I see two things happening. One, I see like a tiered system going on with the traditional publishers where they start kind of picking off the top of the indies. Like, oh, if you've proven yourself in the indie market, if your book's performing well, okay, we'll pick you up, we'll offer a contract now. So I kind of see that, them using the indie world as a way to pick out, the next big thing, or to put their, resources behind.
That's a good point.
And I also see a possibility of a lot more small indie publishers, basically someone who's been indie publishing for some time, then taking on clients, as it were, and holding their hand through the publishing process, and just making a small, dining room table sort of publishing thing, because they've been through it a few times, they know the ropes, and kind of taking on clients. That's what I see the future happening with the adding of indie options.
I saw an interesting talk at, I think most people that are indie have probably heard of the 20 books to 50K group, even if they don't like them. And I went to the conference and they talked a little bit about what you just said, Cynthia, which is slightly different. Kind of like an empire thing. Some of these big writers that write big worlds and universes, and they kind of make an umbrella, and then they bring in a bunch of writers to write within that universe. And that's another thing I think we'll see more of indies. Authors that I know already do it are like Penny Reed, if you know who Penny Reed is. She started doing this big time.
I know Penny Reed.
Yeah.
Well, I think there might even be... Sorry, someone else?
Sorry, there's an author that actually my husband reads. He's traditionally published. What's the name of that book guy? John Ringo. He kind of does that. He has a lot of fan fiction writers, and he'll go through, he'll be like, yeah, that's good, that's canon. And then they'll sort of be allowed to take over that character.
That's awesome, yeah.
So yeah, that sort of freedom. But he kind of created that publisher early. He's got a lot of power with that publisher, so he can do that. All right, let's move on. I'd like to get at least two more in here. What was the biggest publishing mistake you made with your first book? And let's go in reverse order so that Shannon's not always last here.
Shannyn doesn't care about being last. For me, really, I wouldn't say that I regret going traditional, because I really do think that I needed that learning curve. I just really wish I would have learned all of the indie stuff earlier, because no matter what, like all of the marketing, all of that, that's the same everywhere. Anybody who tells you, oh, get a traditional deal, they handle it all, that's a lie. If you're a debut author, forget it, you're still on your own, you're doing it all. Unless, of course, they think you're making the millions. But for me, I think that although I knew going in they weren't going to do it all, I guess I hoped they grew a little more than what they did. So, like my first book did well. I mean, I was a brand new author. I had zero platform. Like I was not on social media. I mean, I joined Twitter like a year before my book came out. I was not on Facebook until I think my fourth book came out. So like I had zero platform. So I wish that I had like learned all of that stuff earlier, because that would make everything so much easier through the whole process. Like having, building those connections and having that kind of outlet. That for me was the biggest mistake I made, was not jumping in and really kind of owning and learning that.
Everything. But if I'm going to narrow it down to one, I'll tell you this. So most indie authors will tell you that you need to write a reader magnet. And I think everybody on this panel knows what a reader magnet is. But in case you're watching and you don't, it is it's like a sales funnel. You write a prequel, you write a little character bio, you write something that you're going to give away for free. And you put that up and you give it away to everybody. And you use it to get people on your mailing list and to get them interested in you, because especially when you're indie, if they've never heard of you, they don't care. They're just like, oh, great. Welcome to the club. There's 3 million of you over there, And so I didn't do that. I'm doing it now, and it's slowing everything down. And so I have very, very little platform. And so very, very few people know about my book. And that makes a big difference. So I highly recommend that. If you haven't heard of it, It's all over all the indie groups, so you can read up more on it. But yeah, that's what I did wrong. Probably the biggest thing.
I would say the thing for me mainly is thinking about return on investment, right? Like, I think as authors, we get really excited right out the gate. Like, oh my God, we got a book coming out. Holy effing, you know what? I don't know if we're allowed to curse on this panel. So
we're the dirty mouth panel, apparently.
It is welcome. Bring all your vulgarities. We'll take you all.
Okay, good. So I'm gonna do because I curse worse than Samuel L. Jackson, which is misleading with the flower print.
I'm not monetized yet. It's fine.
It's like, so, okay, well, you know, return on investment, big deal. So we get so excited about the new book, the new thing, you know, especially when we see, you know, like for me, I grew up in YA, I grew up reading. I think all of us in some way grew up reading, right? And you see like these big splashes. We talked a lot about big names in the industry too, who are doing big things. And we assume either we have to do things like them or we've got to, you know, invest in all of these wild places, like, you know, throwing all the swag out, throwing all the art out, throwing all the mapping and all the fun stuff that makes it fun to produce a book on your own. But I wish, you know, for me personally, I wish I had been more selective in that process, really thinking about what the return on the investment would have looked like right out the gate, which is not something anyone tells you, right? Because it's like everyone was saying, there's no indie school, right? But when you think about it from a business lens and you think about overhead, right? There's so many expenses that you stack up before you realize, oh shit, I have to sell a product to make the money back. So, you know, it's one of those things where, again, you know, and I know we're going to talk about this probably going forward as well, but remembering that this is a business, right? This isn't something where you just throw something up and you move on. You have to think about also what stage of the game you're at. If you know, Shannyn talked about not having a platform before she got the deal. You know what I mean? Like thinking about those things. How can you leverage awareness? How can you show up and be visible? You know, Jen talked about also like, you know, a mailing list or whatever. And it looks different for everyone, but having that understanding of how do I get visible? How do I approach people about my book? What's the right way to sell, quote unquote, at least the right way to sell for me? And what's my return on investment going to look like? If I throw all this money here, am I going to make it all back, especially with my first book?
Yeah. No, it's a hard question. Yeah.
Yeah.
Emma.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll be the controversial one here. My biggest mistake was listening to anybody but me. When you come into this, there's going to be so many people with so many opinions. You should do marketing research, do the cover like everybody else, change this, follow the 8-point plots. You know, they're going to tell you everything. Facebook ads, Instagram ads, AMS, take photos of yourself. Don't take pictures of yourself. Join Bookstagram, but only take pictures of books, but not your books. It's going to hit you like a Mack truck. And it's all so subjective. The best thing I ever did for myself was when I finally, at Heart of the Fae, I was 6 books in, and I was not anywhere near what I thought. I mean, I was making like $150 a month, which is great, but it was nowhere near what I wanted after 6 books. And I just said, screw it. Like, I'm just going to do whatever I want, what I think I believe would sell with the few people who were my fans at that point. And then within 1 month of Heart of the Fae being like actually published the way that I wanted to do it, I was a full-time author and I have not looked back since. So
You got good instincts.
What?
You got good instincts.
Yeah. I mean, I believe that you know your audience because you are your audience. Authors are writing for people who read books like them. So how would you want a book marketed to you? How do you find your books? Those are the best ways to jump in. Don't listen to anybody. And there's a lot of scammers out there who are going to say that they're marketing experts. Look at the books that they're selling. If their books are not selling or if they don't have any books out, don't take advice from them. Just, you know, you'll learn. You will. And otherwise, reach out to people in your author that are indies too. And most of us will tell you everything that we know. I wish that I had done that because I reached out to other starters. So we were all starting at the same point and all of us were jostling and everybody was like, well, I'm not going to tell them that because that works. I'm just going to tell them what doesn't. So you base your entire platform off of something that just, you know, it's a bunch of people who don't know what they're doing. So that's it.
So I think mine is going to be a blend of Emma's and JD's here. So when I freak out about something, I research. Like an insane person. So I listened to all of the podcasts and read all the books, and I couldn't miss anything. Like on the drive to work, you know, how many podcasts can I get? What can I skip through? What can I go faster so I can get it all in as fast as possible? The biggest problem in that is because I write such a niche genre, and most of the stuff on the podcast were like, you know, fantasy and lots of romance and lots of space opera. And here I am with a 96,000 word hard science fiction dystopian. And I'm like, okay, now what? So I did exactly what they said. You know, I wrote the novella, the prequel novella, and I put it out there on Amazon. I got 400 downloads in the first 2 days. And I'm like, this is great. I'm going to have such a platform. I'm going to be a billionaire in the next 3 days. And nobody read it. And I got like a few 1-star reviews out of it. And it was just like, okay, never do that again. So if I had been wise and thought it through a little bit, I would have taken that novella and put it exclusively on my newsletter and started building my audience. Instead of trying to blast things as wide and as far as possible, I would have looked for the people who love my kinds of books, because I was following research and I was following advice for romance authors and for space opera authors, but that's not me. So I need to find readers who don't mind sitting through 4 or 5 pages of an author talking about genetics, when a romance author would like throw the book in my head. So yeah, I definitely think like, and I'm not knocking research at all. I think that the best indies out there are the ones who stay well informed and who are curious and who are, you know, not putting out crap covers that they, you know, drew by hand. Although there's some incredible authors who draw their covers by hand. Incredible. But yeah, I think that was the biggest thing for me is understanding that it's not about reaching as many people as possible, although that comes into it. It's about reaching my people.
Right.
And that, yeah, right. That's about
it. With me, it was, see, this was not my first book. This was actually my 3rd book. My first 2 I published under a pen name, which was probably the smartest thing I ever did. But the biggest mistake I made with my first book was just chasing the accolades. I entered so many contests and spent so much money trying to get these awards that no one cares about. And it was so pointless. So that was, it means nothing to someone who might be interested in the book. It means nothing. So that was my biggest mistake. All right, I think we got a little time for some audience questions here. First one they sent, and we'll just go real quick. We've got about 13 minutes left. For self-publishers, what are the best marketing strategies you recommend?
Facebook ads. Learn them. They're difficult, but they will work.
Yeah, you're going to have to learn how to do advertising on Facebook, and you know, some people would argue, but Amazon as well. You have to learn it. Drink from the fire hose.
Yep.
I would say for sure, don't DM everyone and their mother buy my book, or, you know, throw up the dreaded like 35 million posts in a row. No knocking. I see your heart, boo boo, but like, no. Motives and intentions, I get it, but your actions are in the wrong place. Like, I am someone who very often doesn't say right or wrong, you can't do something, but that's one of those things where if you blast people constantly every fucking day with the same BS, people are not going to listen. People are not going to listen. They're not going to listen. It's going to all look the same. It's all going to blur together, and you're not going to make any waves that way. You're not going to get anyone's attention that way. So I would say focus on the things, you know, advertising is something that I'm dipping into now and something that I think I'm going to be outsourcing very soon as well. But like, what I love is organic marketing and organic reach and building an audience from scratch. I love fandom building. And one of the ways that happens is to really give a shit about your people, right? Like, to really care about the people that you're talking to and being unapologetic about who you are, you know, not trying to show up as someone else. It's kind of like what Jill was saying earlier about, you know, researching all of these different people and all of these different tactics and the different ways things would work. But sometimes it's just as simple as taking someone behind the scenes in your life and what you're doing and what you're writing, and it becomes special. It's unique to you. So I would say find your own voice, figure out that how to leverage yourself as a brand as well, what makes you special in terms of everyone else out there who, even if you're in a niche market, like what makes you special in that market, and how does the way that you author and also how you interact with your readers separate, you from everyone else. But yeah, posting 9 million times to buy my book, or asking an influencer. This is another big one that I see a lot. Asking an influencer to, review a book for free, or can you read my book, like 1,000 million times. That's not going to get you anywhere. Spend your time on actual relationships. Build relationships with some really good influencers, some big influencers who can give you that traction organically. And maybe invest in influencer campaigns as well. Like those are something that really work as well. There's a million ways to do it, but just don't be basic and boring about it,
Yeah.
And
it's better to have like 2 or 3 organic cheerleaders than to have just a carpet bomb of what no one else is going to see. Definitely. All right, next question. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Let's move on. Yep.
What is something unexpected you have learned from your publishing journey? And I'll go ahead and start this. I'm the only one who got to see this question. Probably the biggest thing that surprised me was the relationships that an author can actually have with their readers as an indie author. I wasn't expecting that. I wasn't expecting to actually make friends with certain readers. And that's something, and I've actually made friends with other authors. I've read their book and I reached out, and they, email back. It's a shocking thing. You don't get that generally. So that was one of the things I really was not expecting from this that came about.
Yeah, I think mine is very similar. I went into it with the idea of, the hermit out writing in, the backwoods. But most of my closest friends now I've met or gotten to know through the writer journey. I'm part of the Phoenix Fiction Writers, and I tell you, those authors have gotten me through some really horrible times of life and some really amazing times of life. So not just in like the fiscal or business sense, but just as far as, it's a community.
Yeah, I would say for me too, like, I didn't publish until after I was already part of RWA, and I had a local chapter. So I had a lot of writer friends, but we were all kind of like in the same boat. Most of us were like trying to get there, like finish the damn book. But like once I, got the agent and I got the contract, I was surprised at how many people that I just emailed some New York Times bestsellers and said, hey, what do you think about this? They would respond. They would help. Like that level of community of like, we're not competition. We're all, in this together. And that kind of view, I think, because you don't see that in other industries. It's always a competition. It's this or this. Whereas I think when you're looking at books, it's like, no, I want it all. And so that part, I think, is probably the most surprising for me, is like the level of help that you can get from everybody, even like really big names, people who have their shit together and know how it works, are very quick to turn around and say, yes, let me help you.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say it was the how much time I spend on things that are not writing. That was very surprising to me.
Yeah.
I would say the amount of control that you actually have over your own destiny, whether it's trad or indie, whatever your goals happen to be, right? Whatever path ends up looking best for you. But there's a lot more control you can have over the situation than you think. And it's funny because to be an author is to be in business for yourself, right? Like we've talked about that. And I heard this quote once about how entrepreneurship is the greatest form of self-help, or like you have to get really intimate with your strengths and weaknesses. You have to show up 1,000% as much as you possibly can. And I know for me, as someone who's also like to take it to the writing element, like I'm a mood writer, binge writer, right? And it's really easy to compare yourself to other people's pace in this game, what they're putting out all the time. But learning sort of what makes you tick, and also dealing with the baggage you may or may not have. I find that for me, a lot of my writer's block, quote unquote, comes from shit I'm not dealing with, right? In my own personal life, in my own, you know, like whatever baggage I'm sort of carrying and I'm not realizing is getting in my way, because that all sinks down your energy. It brings up the stress, right? And see, how can you put out good quality content, whether it's, you know, actually getting the book out there, or actually getting, you know, whatever marketing materials or whatever campaigns you're designing or whatever out there from a stressed, destroyed like place, you know? So I'd rather not be the kind of Ernest Hemingway kind of writer, you know, the one that just like, again, pulls away, is really dramatic and sad all the time, and writing is just garbage all the time. I'd rather be as happy as I can within my own process, and that requires, again, showing up 1,000% and taking that control, taking responsibility for who you are, for how you show up, for how you be in your life, right? And that translates, I think, to your audience, to your writing, to all the things.
All right, I'm going to switch back because I think we've got a minute left each to answer this. I'm going to switch back to the next question. Your last book, ballpark figures, what did it cost? And how long did it take from typing the in to having it available to readers? And I'll go first. Last Dragon Princess cost me about $1,500 to publish. $800 of that was the professional edit, which I got a great deal on. And this was my challenge to myself. I wanted to see how fast I could do it. So from typing the end, I had everything in motion, and 3 months after the first draft, it was published, which is crazy fast, but it worked. So I was happy about it.
All right, I wouldn't recommend this, but free. This is actually from the last season, but this is my horror series, and they have every other month I publish a 10,000 word horror short story in a series, and I did that during NaNoWriMo, so it took 5 days to write 10,000 words, and then a little bit of editing. My critique partners are incredible and have done most of like the skimming and the developmental edits. I did the art for the covers. Pool Publishing Services, who does the cover design and the formatting, which is incredible, and gives me a great price, and I highly recommend her. But yeah, so it didn't actually cost me anything, and that's not normal.
I'll tack on to Jill's as well. Don't recommend doing what I do. I'm starting a new pen name, and I am rapid releasing them. I am one of the rare authors who can write 10,000 to 15,000 words a day. So it took me 5 days to write this book that's 70,000 words. The cover cost me $350. I do not have an editor for it. Because again, if you are starting out, have multiple editors. For the first 15 of my books, I had 3 editors. At this point, I know my books well enough to have critique partners and beta readers. So it will cost me $350. That's about it. Marketing, I always throw $1,500 into every book. So that's entirely up to you. There are fantastic ways to market for free. If anybody wants to know them, I have a whole list of free things that you can do that will shoot your book up just good. But yeah, that's mine.
All right. Thank you.
I want to say about, I was thinking about this. I was like, damn, they're asking for my receipts.
Ballpark.
I know. Well, there's a reason I took, I took the time to say return on investment and be very aware. So I think because Heirs of Fate is a compilation of novellas. It's the start of a new series for me. And so I would say altogether maybe around 2,000, but it was sort of gradual, right? Because I released the novellas individually, then I bound them up. And so now what we're looking at is ways to trim the overhead a little bit, because my sister is, a cover artist and she's incredible. So the design element, that might be something to outsource. Again, advertising, something to outsource. But in terms of developmental editing and copy editing, we now have like a line on that with like in-house essentially. So it's a little bit easier. It's kind of like what Emma was saying. It's a little bit easier to trim the fat that way. But it's not, again, something recommended if you're brand new starting out, because I cannot tell you how incredibly amazing it was to have that in the beginning when I was first starting out. Working with a professional editor, can't recommend enough. You definitely grow as a writer.
Mhm.
Yeah, so all the way back to the beginning, if you'll recall, I said I did everything wrong with my first book. This is one of those things. The one thing I did do right, which everybody said, is I did spend quite a lot on a developmental copy edit and proofread to get through because I'd never published before. So that was probably my biggest one. I spent $750 on the cover because they're hand drawn by somebody much better at hand drawing than me.
They're amazing covers. I just have to throw that out there.
Yeah, my artist she's phenomenal. So I overspent on these books by quite a lot. Unfortunately, there's nothing I can do about it now. but it's that drinking from the fire hose. You're gonna make mistakes. You're probably gonna spend too much, or you're not gonna spend enough, or you're gonna spend in the wrong bucket. It's gonna happen to you. I don't care how much you research, because I was just like Jill. I was like, this podcast and this YouTube series and all the free videos, I'm watching it all, and I still don't know what I'm doing, and it's fine. It's fine. So yeah, you'll make a mistake somewhere in the cost of your book, one way or the other.
Mhm.
Well, for me, my costs are very low on my latest releases only because they're re-releases. So I didn't have to put any money out on an editor because they've already been edited and copy edited and proofread. So I just have to go back and clean them up a little bit. So for me, it's really just covers and the cover artists I work with. It's like, I want to say $210 for a cover, print and digital. So I'm done. I bought last year like a block of ISBNs, so I don't have to put money out on that. I have my own ISBNs then. So there is, I don't know how much they are when you break them down that way. And then advertising. So because this is a re-release, I'm not putting tons of money behind it. I'm putting a few hundred just to say, hey, look, these are out, and I'm doing some ads. But looking into like what I'm doing next year, those costs will go up again because I'm writing a totally different series. It's like the whole idea is different. So I'm going back to like, I need a developmental editor for this because it's new. It's not the stuff I've always done and I'm comfortable with. And because I'm not quite comfortable with it, those costs will go up. So I'll be more at like the $2,000 to $3,000 for everything.
Cool. All right, Lace, thank you so much. You have been fantastic. This has been so much fun. I think Beautifully Bookish Bethany is up next with her panel, and y'all have a great night. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.